When we speak about forgiveness, I think it is essential that we listen to the teaching that Jesus gave at one point in the 18th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. When Peter asked the question, "Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" And Jesus' answer is, "Peter, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. And then he gives a parable, a story that they could all relate with. Story about a king who has a number of servants. And he calls all the servants and asks them to give him account as to how much he has lent them and how much they owe him. And one of the servants comes, and in doing the accounting, this servant recognizes that he owes the king an exorbitant amount of money. In the time of Jesus, the parable calls it 10,000 talents. Now it is important to recognize that 1 talent was equal to 6,000 denarii. And 1 denarii is 1 day's wage for a laborer. It's almost as if today we spoke of $100 versus a gazillion dollars. Something that this servant would never, ever be able to repay. When the accounting is done, the servant is declared guilty of having the debt, a debt he can never repay. Not even if he tries, it will take several lifetimes for him to pay that kind of money. And upon begging and asking the king to please forgive him, that he will try his best to do better in paying back the debt, the king, out of mercy, out of forgiveness, out of unmerited grace toward that servant, decides to forgive him completely the entire debt and set him free. When that same servant leaves, let's say, the throne room of the king, he encounters in the street a fellow servant who owes him 1 or 100 denarii. Insignificant compared to the 10,000 talents that he got just forgiven a moment ago. However, his heart is not in the same place in that unmerited grace that he received. And so he grabs his fellow servant by the throat and begins to choke him and tells him, "You have to pay me what you owe me." The man almost begs him using the identical words that he used with the king. But he does not forgive him. And he grabs him and throws him in prison. And when the other servants find out what this man had done, they're shocked. They know how much he's been forgiven. And they've also seen how unforgiving he can be. And so they go back to the king and tell the king, this is what's happened. And the king, of course, becomes irate. He becomes very angry, very disappointed, very hurt with this individual, calls him back and says, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all this debt, and you're not able to forgive your fellow servant." And then Jesus closes the parable by bringing it right back to us, and he says, "So will my Father do to you if you don't forgive your brother from your heart." Interesting thing is that in the preface of the parable, in the question of Peter to Jesus, "How many times should I forgive my brother who sins against me?" Peter thinks he's being extremely generous by suggesting even forgiving 7 times, when all of the Jewish rabbis that Peter must have known at the time suggest that 3 times is more than enough to forgive. And Peter thinks he's being extremely generous, even though he is still having the idea that forgiveness has a limit. And so he offers to Jesus the idea of 7 times, using the number 7, which in Scripture is the number of perfection. Jesus answers Peter, no. Not perfection from the way you see it, but 70 times 7. Almost as if the perfection that Jesus is looking for, that God is looking for, is beyond any sense of our perfection or any sense of perfection. He's looking for unlimited perfection, what I might call infinite perfection, a godly perfection. When we look at Jesus' answer to Peter of 70 times 7, is that if at all we are counting or keeping an account of the number of times we have forgiven, we really haven't forgiven at all. If we have to keep a tally, we really haven't even forgiven the first